Hey, what is up, dudes, dudettes, and all the people of the LV1 gaming community? Bloodie Knux here, aka the Gothic Gamer, with another episode of LV1-on-1, our talk show here where we have exclusive one-on-one interviews with the amazing community here. And I have a very special guest. You may have seen him around, but we have the one and only gaming lawyer himself, Mr. Richard Hoeg. What's going on, Hoeg?
Oh, not much. I'm very happy to be here. Love talking about games. Love talking about law, and there's always a lot going on in this space. Honestly.
There absolutely is always a lot going on in the space, and I think definitely in the past couple months there have been quite a bit active going on in the space. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we got Microsoft, Activision, we've got Epic, Apple, we've got all the stuff that I'm covering on my channel in Virtual Legality, plus stuff I can't get to because there's so many video topics going on. It's a wild time for the video game industry. I'm here for it. I'm a corporate lawyer, transactions by trade. There are no shortage of transactions in the industry at this time.
Absolutely. And yes, for those who don't know, Hoeg here does have his own channel at HoegLaw, where he runs a show called Virtual Legality, where he goes over a lot of big topics, both in the gaming industry, and he's gone over other cases and very big things going on in the world of technology. So if you want to check that out, please go and show him some support. He does a lot of great stuff, and some of the topics we're going to go on today, he's going to kind of overview a little bit, but he does go in depth on a lot of those. And one of the biggest ones right now going on in the industry, obviously, is the Xbox and Blizzard Activision acquisition. Now, this is one that you've kind of gone into depth about for quite some time.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's kind of hard not to, because you're talking about one of the biggest acquisitions in the entire history of the industry. We already saw that Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda and ZeniMax was already something that was absolutely astronomical, and now they completely compounded that with something that's almost 10 times the size of that original acquisition. So for those who don't know, Hoeg, give us a quick rundown of a bit about the acquisition here. Some of the original problems that may have arisen that you had mentioned before in Virtual Legality, and currently where things stand with the acquisition as of today.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you that don't know, I suspect it's none of you, but Activision had some news troubles last year. And those are continuing on into 2022. But after that all happened, the lawsuit primarily from the state of California, they lost a lot of stock price. And so as we later discovered, looking at all the documents that wound up getting filed this year, after they've lost a lot of stock price, Phil Spencer, Satya Nadella at Microsoft call up Bobby Kotick at Activision and say, hey, would you like to sell us the company? To the public, that gets announced in January of this year, and in a couple of headlines is announced as if it has already happened, which you might be familiar with if you got headlines this week that suggest that Elon Musk owns Twitter. He does not just yet, any more than Microsoft owns Activision. It is a long-term process to close a deal where two companies get together. Here, a merger, you can have an asset acquisition. It doesn't matter the structure. It takes a long time, especially if you're going to spend just south of $70 billion in the tech space, where there are regulatory concerns from the US, from the UK, from the EU, and things along those lines. So, gets announced in January and then proceeds behind the scenes to go about its business, trying to get the deal approved by regulators, especially for anti-competition concerns. And we expect that to take quite a bit of time from there. Now, in terms of where we're at today, we know that the Federal Trade Commission in the US is reviewing the deal. We know that they have asked for a second look of the documents from both Activision and Microsoft, which was expected. That really wasn't an unusual milestone in the news cycle, but it does mean that it's going to be a much longer process than if they had just allowed it to go through in 30 days, which was never going to happen. So It's going to be months and months and months and months that we're probably not going to hear a lot of details, and the FTC might allow it to go through, might ask for some concessions. On the very small percentage chance that Microsoft and FTC come to loggerheads, could sue to stop the transaction, and we'll hear more and more about that probably later in this year. But it will be a big moment when that either gets finished or stopped, and the same with the EU. As of today, the big news was that the shareholders of Activision, which are required to approve the deal in order for it to go through, did in fact approve it this afternoon at a 98% clip, meaning 98% of the outstanding shares voted for the deal. And so if you might have seen headlines or news items suggesting that there's an activist investor or others that were saying, no, don't vote on this. That amounted to 2% resistance. And that wasn't really a difficult prediction to make. So as it stands right now, all of the non-regulatory major milestones have been passed, and we are fully into the 6-month, 12-month period of trying to satisfy the FTC, the European Union regulators, and anyone else that might have an interest in the transaction. Not a guarantee, but a big move today, and things are proceeding as one would have anticipated when it was originally announced in January.
And I think that's definitely fair. As someone, obviously, who has worked in the industry, you understand that a company like Microsoft wouldn't make an announcement like this if they didn't already know that a majority of the, as you say, the non-regulatory paperwork and stuff wouldn't have already been met. They already would have had at least a strong idea of how to bypass a lot of those hurdles. Now it's the appealing to the powers that be and a lot of the regulations that need to be done. And you stated here, too, is that while this is based in the U.S. Between the two companies, it does affect the fact that both parties are global tech companies. So there are going to be more than just what the FTC has. We understand with the EU, with the European Union, they have their own trade commission out there, similar to the FTC, and they have a lot more stricter regulations because of, I believe it's called the GDP. They have their own specified
data regulation. Yeah, I would say,
yeah.
I would characterize the EU as historically being stricter on its enforcement of anti-competition and antitrust provisions. Historically meaning the modern era, the last few decades at minimum. The only thing I would caution at all is when you say Microsoft knows something, any lawyers at Microsoft, including their army that they have for a company that big, can only ever get you to, we think this is what's going to happen, with a certain degree of confidence. And even when you see like Satya Nadella at Microsoft say, we don't think we should have to sign a consent decree with the FTC, he's not the decider on that. So you can feel very strongly, and yes, you're right, you probably don't go through all these steps, you probably don't announce it if you don't think there's a good chance it's going to go through, but we don't know what we don't know. And we can't read the minds of the chairwoman at the FTC or the regulators over there and what they might do. It's a new presidential administration in the U.S. for purposes of these kinds of deals. It's a new chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission who has said things about stopping big tech transactions. And so there's a certain amount of consternation about this or any other tech deal, but we're all still kind of waiting to see whether it's saber rattling or something more specific that the FTC might do.
And that's a good point too, is that you do mention that it is completely different because you think that the new chairwoman who took over obviously came in after for some people, the rather turbulent runnings of the FTC under Ajit Pai, and you think that this also comes after probably one of the other biggest acquisitions and mergers that came out within the last decade. I think it was about a year to 2 years ago when we saw the Disney and Fox merger and how big that was, because you're talking about an entire network. And not just what was in the U.S. They also took care of their UK-based information with Sky News or Sky Media out there, and how long that was. So this right here.
The thing I would add about that, since I do get a lot of commenters that come in and say, well, why would they stop Microsoft Activision if they never did anything about Fox Disney? I think it is important to note the Federal Trade Commission sued to stop Fox Disney. That they actually went through their entire review and said, you need to not do this transaction, as it turns out, as we would have expected, unless you sign this consent decree. Fox and Disney had to divest themselves of certain networks and certain things that were a part of the Fox group in order to get approval from the FTC. And so that might happen with respect to Microsoft and Activision. They might say, we're going to have these restrictions, you're going to divest these certain assets. It's unlikely. Divestiture doesn't, at least from my view, seem like an easy solve for anything that the FTC might have a concern with on this. But Fox Disney had to go through the FTC process. The FTC asked for concessions. Microsoft may well have to give some kind of concessions. And what you're hoping for, if you want the deal to go through, is that if Microsoft is asked to do something for the FTC, that it's not really anything that they wouldn't have been willing to do anyway. But that'll be evaluated as it comes out. But it is important to note that Fox Disney didn't just sail through, that they had to go through this process as well.
And you think that for the Fox Disney, that one was almost a 2-year process, or I believe it was about almost 2.5 years for that one from when it was originally announced, which I believe was shortly after or shortly before their last Avengers film, and then that whole process long going on until I think it was in late 2020 to early 2021 is that when it started to be finalized and everything else.
I'd have to look at the timeline because there was an auction bid. They got into a hostile bidding war over Fox with, I want to say, Comcast. I'm trying to remember the situation as it happened. But yeah, they take a long time. So like when Microsoft announces the Activision deal in January of 2022 here, they give themselves until the summer of 2023 when they announce the thing, which is the red flag, yellow flag. Hey, we all know this is going to be a thing with regulators. So they gave themselves 18 months, and in all honesty, could be 24 months. Absolutely. Now, I tend to think we're going to get a feel for how this is going towards the end of this calendar year, which would be 12 months or so from when they announced the deal. But I don't know. And certainly the FTC really isn't under any pressure to get their review done, with the exception of, you might have seen in the news, Amazon and MGM, as they were fighting over the deal. I believe it's Amazon just comes out and says, FTC, you gotta fish or cut bait. Because they asked for a review of documents. Amazon said we fulfilled them all, and the FTC just wasn't deciding whether to stop their review process. Amazon put them on blast in the press, and then that deal went through, I don't even know, 10 days later, as the FTC backed off. So we don't know what we don't know, and government regulators are, notoriously mercurial. They do follow the edicts of the administration that puts them there. It is a political process. There's no question about that. And so we're all watching with bated breath because some of the signaling out of the FTC suggests this could be a problem. A lot of the analysis you might do about Microsoft and Activision suggests it's not the easiest antitrust case to make. Ordinarily, I would say pretty good chance of it not being adjusted really at all. But we don't know what we don't know in terms of the regulatory environment.
And that's a good point because you mentioned how everything is very there's a lot of minutia that they go through, and with the FTC especially, they're very, very big in the bureaucratic system and the way that they really take the time on reviewing everything. Sure. And you mentioned here that they're going through a second comb over everything, and they have a whole other second review on it. So obviously, this is something that was to be expected. Yeah. To really take the time to break it all down and to really go through everything. And we know that there have been already some cases made, and that there's definitely a lot that's going to be happening over the next 12 months in regards to this case specifically and how it's all going to play out. Yeah. I know one of the biggest things that you talked about in virtual legality was you mentioned that there is a possibility that there may be sanctions, or not necessarily sanctions, stipulations that the FTC would put on the deal. One of the things that you mentioned, I believe, was such as not increasing the cost of like Game Pass or anything else. Can you talk some more about possible stipulations that you could see as a possibility if the FTC requires these for the deal?
Sure. So historically, the FTC has tried to direct whatever consent decree that it has achieved with one of the parties to a transaction, specifically to what it identifies as the competitive concerns, right? And if you're trying to envision what an FTC that wants to stop or otherwise get concessions on this deal might be aimed at, the most obvious is something related to cloud computing, where Microsoft is a big-time player, and its interaction with subscription game services, where it's still pretty much the only player, as Sony tries to get up and running with their PlayStation Plus. And so that's, to me, been the most obvious way that an FTC that is motivated to try to find a market that is affected here might go and try to attack them. So at that point, you think, okay, what are the restrictions that you could ask if you're the FTC that you might want to get from Microsoft? And the most obvious is, okay, if we're worried that you're going to monopolize the Game Pass nascent market, then we'd want to say, hey, you're not going to kill consumers. You're not going to just isolate Call of Duty and things from PlayStation Plus Premium. You're instead going to make sure that you don't raise the price of your product for X amount of time. That's the kind of thing that could happen. You've seen references to, hey, maybe they'd require multi-platform support for some of the bigger pillar items, most specifically Call of Duty. To be honest, even from analysts that are talking about this or other experts, you really are guessing, because the FTC has a fairly open door. The only legal weapon they have is they can sue to stop the deal. Once they get to that point in their negotiations, they can ask for almost anything from the other company to say, what do you give us for not suing to stop the deal? And that can go back in time. I did mention this in Virtual Legality. I said, hey, maybe they could potentially ask for multi-platform support of ZeniMax games. And folks come into the comments and say, well, ZeniMax already got approved. And A, the FTC doesn't approve deals, it just allows them. But B, they can ask anything of Microsoft. They could say, you're going to support the Xbox itself for X amount of time. You're going to do something else that seems unrelated. You're going to pull back some portion of your terms of service for how Azure works with Sony. They really do have the sky's the limit kind of thing, but the FTC also isn't the final decider either. So if Microsoft says, effectively, screw you, FTC, we're not anti-competitive, and these requests are ridiculous, they can effectively go say, let's settle this in federal court. And so then the FTC has to make its case why this transaction is a violation of the competition laws of the U.S., and potentially how that interacts with what they have requested of Microsoft in order to get the deal through. And we're way, way, way before the bridge that we might have to cross before we got to that point. So it's all hypotheticals. But all of that could happen. Federal court, FTC block, potential consent decree, negotiations over that consent decree. I have a tendency to think, because the FTC has politicized this, has gone out and said we're concerned about big tech and all this stuff, that they might ask for a consent decree in all cases, but that it might be something effectively that Microsoft would have already been doing. Something that already works within their business model. In order for the FTC to say, hey, we're policing this, we are concerned, save face in terms of that kind of thing, and still allow the deal, because end of the day, anything that they would bring that I can see would have a tough time getting through a federal judicial review. And you see that in articles that came out today, have come out in the last couple months, where you have other analysts saying the FTC could make a fight here, but it would be a difficult one. And so that leverage between Microsoft and FTC is just up to who's sitting around the table and how far you want to push it when push comes to shove.
Okay, so you're saying that even outside of just Blizzard and Activision, that if the FTC really wanted to, they can actually go back and add in stipulations from the past, but that may lead into the possibility or hypothetical situation, as you stated, that Microsoft may see that the requests that the FTC is pushing for is kind of a little bit too much or extreme, and can draw out this whole acquisition and talk a lot longer, because then it has to go to a federal court for the FTC to make their case on why there should be a block on the transaction, why they put the stipulations that they did, and Microsoft would have to kind of go against that and make their appeal to the court on why the deal should go through, and that the FTC's requests are outlandish, just to say.
Right, and that would be very public. So that's very fun for somebody like me. That's fun for Virtual Legality to actually see that fighting happen. We saw it a little bit with ARM and NVIDIA, which is, game adjacent, but certainly technology oriented. And we saw them fight in public documents about what the consent decree should be, and then the FTC ultimately saying we're not taking it. All sorts of good stuff there. But yeah, they're sitting around a table, they're playing poker. The FTC's hand is, we will blow up your deal. And Microsoft says, okay, you're threatening to blow up our deal. We'll figure something out. We'll play this game. And then the FTC asks for crazy stuff. And then Microsoft says, screw it. Blow up our deal. We don't believe you. And can get into that fight. So it's, in terms of transactional guy, a lot of brinksmanship, a lot of fun stuff. It's not my money. It's not my potential billions of dollars that I would lose to Activision if Microsoft loses regulatory review. For those of you that don't know, Microsoft loses between $2 and $3 billion directly to Activision if the regulators stop this deal. So, everybody's playing for keeps on this, but it ain't my money. So I just sit back and say, interesting.
Interesting. That's actually something I wasn't aware of. That there's still a portion that they lose out on it.
They just owe them a check. They owe between $2 and $3 billion. If the regulators stop it, and there's some legalese around exactly what they ask for, et cetera, et cetera. But if the regulators stop it, they owe Activision effectively for the amount of time and resources that Activision has wasted in limbo, because they won't have gotten bought at the end of that.
Ah, interesting. Well, that's definitely something to be aware of for those who are unknowing in this aspect of the fact that this goes beyond just the amount that they would make is if they got bought, but also the fact that they still have to be compensated for in the event that they're not acquired. Because you think that there is a lot of changes that they are currently making and certain things that they aren't able to do because everything is currently in a status that they have to wait on before they can make certain calls or make certain changes that goes away from what, not just what Microsoft wants, but what they can do until basically the public eye is no longer watching their every little move, right?
It's true. I mean, that might stay. If Activision survives this and just continues as Activision, they'll probably have more articles about them with the spotlight. But yeah, no, when you sign that merger agreement in January, you haven't been bought yet, but it's kind of like your house is in escrow, which might be something people are more familiar with, right? You've committed to buy it, and the owner shouldn't burn it down. The owner shouldn't put graffiti all over the walls. So there's a provision in the merger agreement that says, Activision, don't do anything weird with the asset. Don't do anything outside the ordinary course of business is the legal parlance. So they're kind of static. I think they just announced Modern Warfare 2. But they're kind of static and just doing what they're supposed to do. And yeah, they're in limbo. They're assuming they're going to get bought within the next year. And if they don't, they negotiated for $2 to $3 billion.
Very interesting, and that must have been in some of the documents that someone, a layman like me, would not have the time to sit there and go through all this and understand all the legalese, as you put it.
Through them pretty fast, but I think when I go through a full merger agreement, they tend to be at least an hour long. So yeah, we just went through the Musk Twitter merger agreement over in Virtual Legality, and yeah, I definitely did the Activision Microsoft merger agreement. So if you go to my channel, it's in the playlist somewhere. Hopefully I titled it appropriately. I can't honestly remember.
And don't worry, guys, for those who actually want to have him explain the full breakdown and you don't want to read it yourself to get that too long didn't read, I was like, we'll make sure that there's a link to that specific video in the chat for you guys.
Oh, cool.
Yes. I was like, so with that, you did mention here, we've seen a lot of the public spats in some of these cases. I think one of the most notorious one right now, besides NVIDIA and ARM, has to be the Epic and Apple case when all of that was coming out due to Epic filing against Apple saying that their regulations on basically having a closed ecosystem, not allowing any other payment processor to go through their devices, kind of led them to trying to find another way for Epic to basically allow the purchase of the V-Bucks, or the in-game currency for those who play Fortnite, to go around Apple's specific processor for payments. And that led into a very big dispute because of the fact that Apple ended up taking Fortnite and Epic off their store and basically taking all of their games and stuff like that. And I believe that there was even a statement that they stopped the use of, or there was like an attempt to stop any use of the Unreal Engine
the court
but that led into a very, very big dispute with them that ended up with Epic actually recreating a sort of 1984 style dystopian anti-Big Brother statement against Apple to open up their platform and their ecosystem to allow other payment processors to go through and not be stuck to this single use that also had a very, very high share that went to Apple for processing the payments, and then the remainder going to the developers and the anyone basically who is developing the apps and stuff like that. So kind of understanding that public display, what were your thoughts on that whole situation? Because there was a lot that came out between both Epic and Apple, and then a lot of other documents that brought up a lot of the major players in the tech company. We saw some very big information regarding PlayStation and some of their requirements and regulations, especially when it came to Fortnite, and some things that some people didn't find too exactly consumer friendly and definitely not competitive friendly, and some very interesting information from Microsoft on how they handle a lot of their interactions with Epic. So kind of give us your thoughts on that whole situation, and then some of the information that came out from that dispute.
Sure. So, I mean, Epic versus Apple was crazy. I think it's probably still my longest playlist. It's probably 80 episodes over on my channel. But Yeah, the craziest thing about it was that Epic knew what the terms of service were for both Apple and also Android. I mean, that's a different lawsuit because it's slower than the Apple one. And said, screw it. We're just going to put a link to our bank and you can buy V-Bucks direct from us and we're not going to pay Apple a dime. Apple's current model for their app store is that you get to come on the app store. We've got X millions of people and we charge you 30%. We take a 30% cut of any dollar that you make on your store. Obviously, when you're talking about Fortnite and billions of dollars a quarter, they would prefer not to pay that 30%. So they just one day said, we're not going to pay it. And Apple and Android immediately acted, so you're in violation of our terms of service, which have been the same for 10 years. And Epic sued them in federal court. Like it was a trap. I think my video thumbnail for it is, Admiral Akbar on the front. And it was a trap that Epic laid, but it was never a wise trap from a litigation standpoint because you have those unclean hands. You deliberately breached your agreement that didn't change and then claim that it's antitrust, anti-competitive. And the judge says at the very start in preliminary hearings, you don't need to breach this agreement to bring this legal case. You can go back to complying with the agreement. You can get Fortnite back on the store. You can make X amount of dollars, and then you can still win the court case. And Tim Sweeney, the CEO of Epic Games, says, nah, we're not interested in that. Judge says, okay, well, you can go back on, and we can put the money in escrow if you're worried that Apple's just going to steal it. And then we can decide the court case. And Apple says that would be okay with us if the money just goes into escrow, and then we divide it as to who wins. Tim Sweeney says, no, we're not willing to do that. And all of this stuff was very theatrical. I mean, they had that 1984 video ready when it happened. They knew Apple and Android would respond that way. They had free Fortnite merch ready that gets sent to YouTubers and Twitch streamers that day. This was not seen well by the court. I mean, she mentions it in a couple of places when she's making her decision, said this was a marketing campaign. You're trying to use federal laws in a way that's untoward, et cetera, et cetera. And we go through all of this. It's a very expedited case. I think it gets solved within a very short period of time. Case goes on, I want to say last May. I covered every day. And then over the summer, the judge makes her decision. She comes out and says Apple wins, give or take. And even the one thing that she gave to Epic, which was a small change in the Apple rules, got enjoined as both sides appeal this to the Ninth Circuit, the Court of Appeals above where they had the case. So right now we're waiting on the appeals. And in all honesty, I think it's going to have cameras in the courtroom when that Ninth Circuit argument goes down. I'm definitely going to be covering it. But to be truthful, that doesn't need to be a win for Epic to have them win on what happened during that period of time. Because what Epic did, what Tim Sweeney did, and this was undoubtedly part of the strategy that they had, was to take that entire court situation and highlight that Apple and Android have this kind of closed ecosystem, and Android less so we're not going to get into it that much, but they also sued because sideloading is too onerous and a bunch of stuff that's a little bit more detailed. That Apple's closed ecosystem was too much, and they took that to legislatures around the country and around the world and said, this is a problem, you should open these things up. And the result has been that it's gotten shot down in a bunch of states, but that the US federal government is currently entertaining it, and the EU regulators recently passed something that looks a lot like what Epic asked for from the beginning. And with a jurisdiction as big as the European Union, neither Apple nor Google can really ignore it entirely. So Epic is finding wins outside of what, in my opinion as a lawyer, was a very suspect, very bad antitrust lawsuit that they were really realistically always going to lose in the fashion that they did. Apple, they build a phone, they make an ecosystem, they're allowed to control that ecosystem broadly, absent another intervening law. So now they're going through the legislative process, which is more appropriate in my eyes, and they're finding victories. And it wouldn't surprise me if they continue to do so. But as a lawsuit, fun to talk about, loved it in virtual legality. And I think you asked about the information that came out. The funny part about that is that the court clearly didn't seal the documents properly in like the first week and a half of the court case. So there's a bunch of evidence that's coming in that's being admitted to the court, and it's supposed to be under seal. There's really no reason that the public needed to see the business terms of how Sony was navigating Fortnite and free-to-play and V-Bucks and where there should be money exchanging hands, if there's too much of a difference between where people play and where people buy. All that stuff, awesome. Did a video on it. Never should have seen the light of day. And the court corrected that 10 days in, said, oh crap, our seal button wasn't working. And then when things got admitted, everything came in under seal. But a lot of fun stuff. Absolutely right.
And I think that was probably one of the biggest things that we're seeing now, as people have mentioned the whole, as they were calling it, the Sony crossplay tax, right? That devs were having to pay a certain fee or a certain price to Sony to allow crossplay for games that did not have, I believe it was not a majority of their players on their platform.
It's a little different than that. It's. I mean, we don't need to get into the details, but suffice to say, it's if you imagine that all the minutes or 80% of the minutes of people playing Fortnite occur in PlayStation 5 land, and then for some reason, all those people actually spend 80% of their American dollars or whatever jurisdiction you're in buying V-Bucks in Xbox land. Sony says, well, that's not fair. You're using our resources. You're playing it on PlayStation 5. But for some reason, they're getting all the V-Buck money, and we need to share the V-Buck money. So they had this kind of elaborate thing that says, all right, if we're off by this percentage, you're going to owe us a royalty on the difference, like this. But it's not as clear as just majority. It's really matching up. Like if 80% played on Xbox and Xbox got 80% of the dollars, Sony doesn't have an issue. It's when there's this difference where the dollars and the play time is that they decided to extract their pound of flesh. And it was very, very interesting because we had never seen anything. We'd never seen what that looked like. And so, yeah, it's fun stuff. We don't even know if Sony continues to do that or not. It seems like they're dropping it in terms of we can see more crossplay happening on PlayStation, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, and that's definitely probably one of the biggest things here that is definitely still having a massive impact on everything that we know, right?
Yeah.
Because of the fact that we are seeing more crossplay. It's still slow, and that we are still seeing that there are some games that are coming out with crossplay, but there's still stipulations based on certain requirements by either certain platform holders or the publishers themselves, based on a lot of things. Because we know that was one of the biggest setbacks for crossplay during the last generation, as we saw some documents and previous interviews before. That was one of the big reasons why there wasn't crossplay during the 360. When we saw that Xbox was, big market share and didn't want to open crossplay with Sony when they were apparently approached on it on a specific title. I believe at that time it was Final Fantasy XI. And then we've seen that over time things have changed. And not just from the platform holders themselves opening it up, we see a lot more push now from devs. A lot more devs have been wanting to push for crossplay, and I think that's because of the fact that we start seeing a lot more online communities and them wanting to support them. And in some cases, there are communities on certain platforms that are starting to dwindle due to other titles that may be in the game or other free-to-play games that are coming in, and that they want to help support the current communities that they have by being able to merge them all together, so that way there's not issues with such things as queue times or anything else. Is that one of the more prominent reasons you would see that they may be making that change, as there's more of a push for it, and not necessarily just cross-play, but more cross-progression as well?
Oh yeah, and I love cross-progression. I love just coming into wherever and having it be just fine. Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense, right? So you're a dev, especially if you're not Fortnite. Fortnite can pay for things. Fortnite can do various things. Fortnite's not going anywhere. But you think
Fortnite can literally pay for its own land with every IP under the sun, and everyone would go there. I mean, we look at the game itself. It's its own metaverse that literally has crossovers with every major IP. We have Marvel characters, DC characters, Star Wars. They even brought in some of the biggest IPs. We see that Kratos is in the game, Master Chief, and now they're breaking out into movies because we saw they had the Xenomorph and Ripley from Aliens and all sorts of other stuff going on.
Funny part about all that is I'm covering Epic versus Apple. I think Epic has a bad case. I'm mentioning that a lot. Tim Sweeney's yelling at me on Twitter. And the one thing is, what's funny is, I like Fortnite. I play Fortnite with my daughters. It's a good product. They do a good job with it. So that never kind of impacts the way I analyze things. It just is what it is. But yeah, less than Fortnite, you imagine you've got populations that you have issues with potentially, or that your game requires for its design a certain amount of people. You resent the fact that it's siloed. Right? That it all works together, but this potential population here is kind of maybe a little bit problematic, and maybe one's working well and this one's problematic. And if you could just combine them, you'd have more longevity. And that matters, especially at the size of the dev, that, every little bit counts. If you can get another 6 months out of your product, that's another 6 months potentially a burn for whatever your next product is going to be. And so this stuff is important. At the same time, the platform holders are not unjustified to say, hey, if they're here, we want to get money. So I suspect those walls are coming down a little bit. Certainly with PlayStation exposed on that from the court case itself. I suspect, just based on what we're seeing from inference, smaller companies are doing crossplay, that they have at least reduced, if not eliminated, some of the requirements that looked a little bit draconian that we saw before. And I think that's a great thing. I'm a guy that has a Switch, an Xbox, and a PlayStation. I want to play everything. I love gaming, and I want more and better games on every system. And people accuse me when they come into any given video of being a shill for whatever I just spoke about. But I love all this stuff. And so
yeah, you probably get those. You probably get those comments like everyone does. Is that if you're talking bad on Sony, it's just like, oh, you're an Xbox fanboy, you're a shill for Microsoft. And then whenever you start criticizing Microsoft, oh, you're nothing but a Sony fan and nothing but that. It's just always like, it's always the opposite of whatever you're talking about. Yeah. That you're, for one or the other, it's just like, hey, I'm being as completely hands-off and as analytical and third-party unbiased as I can be.
Great games, and that doesn't mean that the companies don't make mistakes, and they do. What's the funniest part about that for me is just the nature of YouTube, like where Virtual Legality lives, and you put out a video and let's say it's anti-Microsoft, or it's criticizing their messaging on some aspect of the Activision deal, something like that. You'll come in and you say you're just a Sony shill, et cetera, and because people are kind of isolated into whatever video YouTube sent them, if they're not, already fans of the channel, they won't notice that, like, the day before is a video that says Sony's screwing up in X, Y, or Z way. And it's just funny to me. And I like analyzing this stuff and seeing how people interact with content. Because, yeah, if all the companies could do perfect and say the right things and get the best games out, I would be the happiest gamer in all the land. But they don't. And so I talk about them.
Exactly. And that also keeps you in a job, because if every company was doing everything perfectly fine, I was like, you would be out of legal work.
Talk about other stuff. But yeah, it would be a little less exciting to be like, well, another perfect day for Sony. But no, I would be happy with it in terms of consumer.
And I think that's where it all comes down to, is that as consumers, we have certain views on a lot of the products here and the way that we interact with the medium, because of the fact that you think that gaming is a very interactive medium. It's much different than what we saw before with like TV and the music industry and the movie industry. It's very hands off. Yes, there's definitely a lot of behind the scenes where you have more workers and a lot of those unions and protections for a lot of what goes behind on the scenes and on the sets and stuff like that, where that's where it is. But when the product comes out, it's very much a, hey, the consumer, purchases it, and, it's just a hands off, you put it on and kick back. Whereas gaming, there's a lot more, and especially within the last, let's say, 2 decades, especially within the last maybe 10, 15 years, where online has become more prominent.
Sure.
We saw the creation of DLC, and now the evolution of live services, because MMOs have been around since the late 90s. We see with games like WoW, which is still going on, or EverQuest, or Guild Wars, a lot of those massive titles, which were some of the progenitors for the modern day live service, because they were living MMOs. And now we're seeing that more games are able to be continuous with one title. We saw the evolution of Sea of Thieves. We've seen how far games like Fortnite has obviously grown into the massive behemoth that it has. We also see games like Rocket League, Apex Legends, and a lot of other titles. Speaking of Activision, we have the ever-growing success and depression right now that is Call of Duty Warzone. All of these live services have definitely changed over the past 10, 15 years because of that. So kind of seeing that this evolution of support and change on how a lot of that is changed because of just the change of time because tech is one
Totally.
industry that never stays still.
Well, and you
So it's
combine
very
that
interesting.
with the evolution of what it means to be a gamer, game fan, whatever term you prefer, right? Because live services lend themselves so well to something that movies and television really doesn't have an analog for, and that's Twitch and YouTube gaming and Facebook gaming. And those games are so successful because they are ever changing or because they're emergent in the gameplay that you're otherwise having, and that you see that kind of emphasis. And I know as a single player narrative game lover myself, sometimes I wish there were more resources left for those particular games because of the success of live services. But I enjoy Destiny. I enjoy Fortnite, as I already mentioned. And so I totally get it. But all of those are kind of combining and growing and doing different things together. And that's super fun. I mean, this is a brand new era of video games. And to be honest, as much as I criticize some of their messaging and things like that, Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft might be doing the best that I can ever remember them doing, at least all at the same time. They all have their different business models. They all have their fans. They're all massive successes in this current generation. And that seems significant in and of itself.
And definitely because you do see that over the past at least the past 20 to 25 years, right? Since the mid-90s when Sony first came on the scene with the PlayStation 1 and everything else, we kind of seen that there's always been a change and dynamic between the console manufacturers and the publishers at the time. We saw that Sony had their rise with the PS1, but it was still behind Nintendo. Then the PS2 took off, but Nintendo was still right there. We saw the death of Sega. We saw the emergence of Microsoft and Xbox. Xbox kind of took a little while to really hit their rhythm with the OG Xbox, and 360 they took off, and then we saw a lot of like back and forth.
Yeah.
And then the last generation, Xbox One had a very rough start. We saw a massive dip on them. PlayStation completely soared, and then Nintendo was right above them because Nintendo seems successful no matter what they do because Nintendo can do anything.
Wii U. We don't talk about the Wii U. The Wii U but everything else, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the Wii U is the one exception of the family. It's just like, how every family reunion always has that one family member that's just like, yeah, we love him, but we don't talk about it, and that's the Wii U.
The cool part about Nintendo to me is they're always doing weird stuff, right? I got cardboard stuff on my shelves over here from Nintendo. Let's try out the Wii. Let's do this Switch thing. Let's see if we can power it with a cell phone processor from 15 years ago. Hey, all right, cool. Good job, Nintendo. I mean, I love them. They're super weird. And frankly, as a guy with, two middle-ish age kids at this point in time, they're often the place that you can go and get the most of that kind of family-friendly fun stuff. So everybody has like their speciality, their genre. I've got a Game Pass. I play Kirby on the Switch. I'm doing all sorts of stuff on the PlayStation. They still are the home of the linear story-based narrative game right now. I mean, I love them all, but they're all different.
Exactly, and I think that's the beauty of healthy competition, and when every company wants to do something different, is that you get these different experiences. Nintendo's always done Nintendo. They stay doing whatever Nintendo wants to do at the day. They're like, hey, guess what? You know what? We're gonna make a video game console in your shoes so that way you can always carry them wherever you walk.
I wouldn't put it past them.
Why not? They sold everyone cardboard with the Labo. I wouldn't be surprised.
I like my Labo, but yeah, it's cardboard sheets. Good job, Nintendo.
Right? Got $100 off of everyone for some cardboard. I could have got that for $5 at the Lowe's up the street. But hey, it works, right? They sold it.
It does, and I had fun. I decorated it with my daughters. We drew on the little house. Nintendo, if you can sell me $100 for a fun family investment that lasts a number of weeks, you did it. That's what I'm looking for.
And I think that's what it is that it really kind of appealed to that do-it-yourself kind of feeling, and the way that they had all the little markers and stickers and stuff like that to decorate it. I think that was something cool. I won't deny that it was interesting as a concept, but you're right. They've always done something differently out there, and that every platform has definitely hit their stride. Microsoft and Xbox was always the home of shooters. We saw how they had the king of first person with Halo. They definitely broke broke ground with cover-based shooters with Gears of War and everything else. And the early years when they were, the partner with Activision for Call of Duty's marketing back in the 360 generation before we saw the swap and everything last gen. So it's definitely interesting with Sony, as you mentioned, they're definitely the home of, or single player narrative story driven kind of linear titles. I was like, even God of War has its semi-open world but still very linear, and then of course we know the success of Last of Us and other games like that, but they are kind of branching out, which is nice because we've seen the success of games like Ghost of Tsushima, or we've seen like Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West expanding into that more open world RPG, semi-RPG kind of feel to it.
Definitely.
Still the story could still be at times linear, but they're switching up the gameplay on it, and I think that's what's kind of helping them out with a lot of that.
Yeah. I mean, I love Horizon Forbidden West from this year from them. I'm looking forward to more. I loved Returnal last year. I like Sony products. I'm still playing Horizon from Microsoft. Best racing in gaming, in my opinion. Everybody offers good stuff.
Definitely. Now, I think that there's one last thing that I have to bring up here. Sure. With everything that's going on. Going back to Activision, we know that you had mentioned that there was some articles coming out from a lot of news outlets, and you mentioned early on that it was approved by the shareholders. Yes. With a 98% approval rating. And we know that there have been some specific news outlets that reported that there was a lot of negative sentiment towards the deal, that it wasn't looking as good, and a lot of people were, or that there were some shareholders that were actively against it, with the fact that right now shares for the company, as reported, were 25% under what was being offered by Microsoft. Do you feel that some of the news that came out on this was trying to jump the gun early? Was it trying to spread specific misinformation or kind of negative sentiment towards it? Or was this just honestly a case of information that may have been gotten too early from some parties but not providing the whole picture?
Well, so I don't think that the shareholder vote was ever in doubt. So that did happen today, and I don't think we were actually expecting them to announce it today. They had said that they would announce the vote results on May 4th, I think. So obviously 98%, they just wanted to get it out there. And they probably wanted to get it out there in connection with the article that you are alluding to, which said that effectively Wall Street was betting against the deal going through. And no, I want to give the benefit of the doubt to authors and that kind of thing. The article in question is an analysis of stock prices and the fact that, hey, if it's going to buy for $95, it's not close to $95. They must be betting against it. And really just misunderstandings of what risk premiums are, what profiles look like in terms of evaluating what a price should be, especially in an inflationary environment like the one we're unfortunately currently living through. And the knowledge that even if Microsoft is going to buy Activision, you're probably holding on to a share if you bought today for a year, potentially a year plus, at an inflation rate that might be double digits this year. I mean, that's what we're looking at. So you're always going to have a discount from that share price. And, it's a major outlet. I don't want to accuse anybody of clickbait, but you put outrageous headlines out there and maybe you get more attention from guys like me, who will be doing a video on Virtual Legality trying to ease some people back off the ledge and explaining why, to be honest, that kind of reporting is ridiculous. So I think it's analysis that was just done poorly, but we're all human. We all make mistakes. I put a tweet out there that said it was ludicrous, and it is. But I am loath to impugn ulterior false motives to people I can't read the minds of. So it's a bad article. Bad analysis, and maybe that just kind of happens sometimes.
And that definitely is, as someone who's written his fair share of articles and thoughts and stuff like that, there's always the change. You go based on certain information you have at the time, and sometimes it turns out to be right. Sometimes when you report on secondhand information that's given to you that you may feel is accurate at the time, may not necessarily be when full details or more confirmation comes out later on. So then you either have to write a second article or kind of backtrack some stuff. So it definitely happens in the industry more often than not. But as you mentioned, sometimes the way that you present the information, how you title it, is not the way to go about it.
Indeed.
So with that being said, guys, I do want to thank everyone who stopped by and came and checked out the video. But before we get out of here, Rick, it was great to see and talk to you again, my friend. I was like, where can people find you, and where, besides, obviously, they could check out Virtual Legality, but where can they find you at outside of that?
Yeah, well, I'm doing a number of things now, especially these weeks. I feel run ragged a little bit. So absolutely come by youtube.com/HoegLaw, HoegLaw. Check out Virtual Legality. We've been covering the Elon Musk purchase at length. There will, if I'm able to do it today, there will be an Activision Microsoft video today. I'm also covering the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial at a friend's site, Legal Bytes, BYTES, spelled like you're playing video games, who's been doing it for fully half now. This is the end of the third week. We expect 3 more weeks of that trial. A lot of fun stuff. If you're interested in law and defamation and things like that, come on by. We're on like 10 hours a day. And then last but not least, we've got the 200th episode of the Seasoned Gaming Bitcast this Sunday at 11 a.m. It might be already gone, depending on when this interview goes up. But at least right now, 11 a.m. on Sunday, we have the 200th episode. And if you missed that one, come on over on 11 a.m. on Sundays. Anyway, we're having fun conversations about gaming in general. And so that's about it. You can also follow me on Twitter at HoegLaw if you want previews of what are likely to be virtual legalities, because I do tend to do that.
You do tend to put out a couple tweets every now and then on how you feel on a certain something that may come out, and then you're just like 2 hours later, virtual legality on what you're tweeting about.
I have that, and then I start like more thoughts. Like, no, we're gonna do a video. Because Twitter audience and YouTube audience aren't the same, and you can obviously be more complex in your thinking in a video, the length of which you control over, tweeting something out, where I'm always desperately afraid that shortening something too much changes the entire meaning and I miss it, and all hell breaks loose. So yeah, check out all those areas. I'm doing a lot, having a lot of fun, and thank you for the kind word. Definitely at the top of the video, but just in general.
No, thank you so much for tuning in with us. But guys, that was Hoeg. Make sure you go and check him out. You can find all his links and all of his socials down in the description below. But until next time, guys, this was LV1-on-1, your one-stop shop for one-on-one interviews with some of the greatest faces that you'll find in the industry. But until next time, we'll see you in the next video.